The tachometer wasn't factory equipment with our Tri-5s, but it seems like it is. You look at almost every Tri-5 Chevy that's not bone stock, and they probably have a tachometer somewhere on the steering column or under it, under the dash, somewhere. And so now to me, I'm old school. It belongs on the steering column, and that's where you'll usually see it. Now, if you have a gasser or a former drag car, you probably have it mounted on your dash, and that's fine. That's fine. Uh, I'm not going to be racing anything uh, in my car, so I don't need the tack to be in the line of sight of where I'm at, and I don't need one with a big old shift light to let me know when to shift. I'm not going to be racing. But anyway, but I do want the tack, and I want a, right now I don't have a speedometer that works. So, and I will tell you, years and years ago, on my 55 two-door hardtop, after a while of driving, you get used to knowing what engine speed in high gear is, 50, 55 miles an hour. And just like my first 55, the gearing on this transmission and the rear end is low enough that it's going to be, I'm not going to be doing 70 miles an hour on the highway for long. I'll tell you that. But anyway, I want to tack in, and it's been a process of discussion and trial and a lot of error. Anyway, let's get into it. Welcome back to the channel, guys. We're just about to get a thunderstorm rolling through here, so I'll be quick for a change. All right, you won't believe it, but I'm still wrestling with placing a tachometer in my Tri-5, in my two-door 55 wagon. Now, I've talked about this in several installments in the past. My original thought was to place it on the lower left corner of the windshield on the driver's side, have it make a mount that would attach underneath the garnish molding in that corner. And I worked on that for a while, first using cardboard and then or cereal box cardboard, and then trying to transfer that to sheet metal. And kind of gave up in frustration because for starters, one of the mounts on that garnish molding, the screw was broken off in the base underneath there. Anyway, I'd mocked it up there, and I just wasn't sold it was a good location. And it was to mount it was going to get complicated, and my fear was that this tachometer would have an extension out away from the garnish molding without anything to support it. And while these inexpensive tachometers are lightweight, I felt that it would be bouncing around and vibrating, and I just opted not to do it that way. Now that left me with now the whole problem is that my Tri-5 has an aftermarket tilt steering column, and unlike the stock, the factory column has 8 or 9 inches of column that you can strap a tachometer to. And that's the old school way, and that's the way I did it 40 years ago. And that's what I wanted to do this time. However, I've got a CPP brand tilt column, chrome, nice, beautiful. However, there's about an inch and a quarter of steering column to mount it to, because the tilt function has this large fairing, so it's nice and sexy and pretty and smooth. So mounting anything in that spot like you used to, the old school way was going to be difficult. Now, another problem was I didn't have an old Sun tack. Now, I had one, but it didn't work. It was one that came on the car. And so, and me being a little bit of being thrifty, i.e. cheapskate, I didn't want to spend over $100 for a new reproduction Sun tack or a vintage one. I wanted to, and I wanted chrome. Well, the inexpensive option for that was one of these tachometers, and you can get them for just for 30, 35 bucks. Uh, and so that's what I did. I got one of those. And now I'll throw some pictures up here. You probably have seen the listings for these things on eBay or maybe even on Amazon. And the problem with them is that they have this god ugly mount uh, that pivots underneath on the bottom of the tack. Now, the way this tack is made, you can loosen the screw back and turn the bezel around so you could actually mount it to. It has and the mount is flat, and you could screw it. You could mount it to the wall. You could mount it to anything that you wanted to put holes in. Uh, it had no real option for a steering column mount, which didn't matter so much because the steering column didn't have a easily accessible place to use the old school mount type to put that thing in. So I'm trying to figure out what to do. Do I get another? Do I keep this tack I've got? It's cheap. I've already got it. Don't need buying another one. Well, I don't need two of them. I only need one. And so anyway, I toyed with I even bought another tack. I bought a 2-inch diameter Xus, I think, and it had a chrome bezel. It was pretty, but it was too small. I'm used to the typical old school Sun, 3.5-inch or 3 5/8 inch diameter tachometer. That's what I had 40 years ago, and that's what I wanted this time. Something similar to it anyway. So I scratched my head and I figured and worked to try to make that mount lower left of the windshield on the passenger driver's side. I tried to make that work and just wouldn't have any luck. So I thought, well, all right, how about on the steering column? Now, if I'd been interested, if I disassembled the steering column and I got down into that fairing on the lower side of the hinge where the wheel tilts, I could have drilled a couple of mounting holes and just made a mount and mounted it right to the steering column with 2 or 3 screws. And I've thought about that for a long time. I just wasn't in love with the idea of taking the steering column all apart because it's working. And sometimes you take apart something that's working to try to do something else, and you end up with more problems. There's a Pandora's box you can open. This is this. I'm no stranger to reinventing the wheel. Okay. Now, usually I try, and I'll try something different and another approach. And at the end of the day, with this tachometer, I decided I wasn't going to reinvent the wheel, but I was going to adapt the old school method of mounting the tachometer, i.e., using a hose clamp and the curved foot on the tachometer mount. Let's see, yeah, right here. So this is an old school type. It's the modern rendition, the Xus Equus products. It's a beautiful tack. In the eBay listing I saw, that bezel looked chrome because it was getting reflections off the packaging. And so I ponied up and bought it. Well, guess what? It ain't chrome. And I haven't sent it back or anything, but it's not the one I want. So I'll probably list it, sell it on eBay as new out of the box. But anyway, this mount on the back is the interesting part. You can see it's screwed on with this bolt. It's shaped, got the curvature of the back of the housing, and then it's got that curved mount that goes on your steering column and gets strapped on. All right. Well, again, I finally decided to quit reinventing the wheel, and I thought, why can't I adapt that same sort of mount to this steering column? So by that point, I had ground off the original mount and all of that stuff, and I had a nice smooth surface here. I had a hole in the bottom that I filled with a piece of sheet metal that I epoxied in place with JB Weld. And that's really where my mount was going to start. Whatever was going to mount, I was going to use that as the beginning point since it's good and solid. However, that wasn't going to work either. So make this long story shorter, I decided to, instead of starting with the meter or the tachometer and making the mount for it, I'd started at the steering column. So I used my shape copier. I can get it here. My shape copier, and I copied the shape of the steering column. And I did that. And then I made this mount. Now this mount is not very pretty, but there you go. It's almost a near perfect curvature to match the steering column. And so then I decided once I got that to fit, then it was time to put the tack on the mount. Now I had to place it a couple of different times because the steering column is at an angle. And what happened is you've only got about this much room for the tack to sit and strap on. And if the steering column was perfectly horizontal, no problem. But it tilts back at a pretty good angle. And so this part of the mount in the back of the tack was up against the instrument cluster. Not going to work. So I had to move. Basically, I had to raise the gauge. Now I left this is part of the mount, and I left lots of extra here so I could adjust the height of where the tack was going to be in reference to the foot down here. And so I had to move it a couple of different times in order to get the foot to go where it should, and then I had been adjusting the angle, and finally I decided if I had to raise this up enough to have it over so it wouldn't interfere with the steering column, because the steering column was pushing it back towards the instrument cluster. So to make that happen, I had to raise the gauge, raise the tack, and give it some clearance. And so now it'll go on the column, and it's leaning back, but it's not hitting anything. And it's the gauge, the face of the gauge is in the clear, but yet it's not so high that it blocks the odometer, and that's it. The bright light indicator is visible. The idiot lights, which don't work, by the way, yet, are visible as turn signals. It doesn't obstruct anything. But so this was a case of reinventing the wheel and then deciding not to. I just adapted that type of mount to what this is. So now the mount that you see that I'll show on the picture here, that's a piece of junk. It's useless. And so the best thing I did was, instead of trying to somehow incorporate that into my tack mount design, I just took my cutoff tool and just excised it completely from the case on the tachometer. The smartest thing I did, and then that opened up avenues for other mounts. Now, the first mount idea I had, I could probably make that work, but it just didn't. I just was worried this thing was going to vibrate. The gauge is light. Now, actually, the steel I made this mount of weighs probably half as much as the tack does. But anyway, I have dry fitted that mount. Now I've got to finish it. For example, I've got this much of the mount sticking up above the gauge because I wanted room to move it around. So I've got it mounted to the back of the tachometer with this in the same screw hole that holds the front and the back of the case together. So the single screw is a good tight fit, and I think it's going to look fine. Now I've still got some Sharpie from drawings on this because that was one of the original locations of the bottom of the tack. But I had to move it up to give it room to clear the tilt of the lower steering column. Anyway, I'm real happy with it. Now I've got some thin foam that I'm going to put on this on the foot just to keep it from scratching my steering column. And also I'll use the same foam to go on the inside of the hose clamp. Again, in hopes of not being able to avoid damage to the steering column. Um, anyway, so I don't have it on. Did have it on, and it's going to uh, go great. It's going to look great. Um, and I've got to cut the top of this off, which I don't know if I'll do it tonight or not. We have a thunderstorm rolling in, but if not today, then tomorrow. This tack, I've had it operating, and it's not a bad looking tack, and it operates well. It's got an adjustable. It's got adjustable different color backlight options, and it's got a shift indicator, which I'm not going to be dragging, and I really don't need that. But it's a nice little feature they add. Um, so, and what I did not want was and I love tachometers, but I didn't want one with the big old light mounted to it. I mean that if you're actually drag racing, you know, and you want to be able to see it without looking at it, that's the tack you need with that indicator like that. It's going to be nice and bright and visible when you're watching the tree and not the tack. But I'm happy with this. Now the other tack, the Equus, I don't know. I don't hate to be a stickler, but I don't like the black bezel. I'm a chrome man, not the Google Chrome, but the chrome finish. Anyway, well, that's how the attack's going to end up. I left and went to town to go to AutoZone to buy a hose clamp, 2-inch hose clamp, and left my wallet at home. No hose clamp tonight, buddy, but there's always tomorrow. And then I still have to get the foam in place and everything. But it looks good. It's going to look good there, and I can't wait to get it wired up. We have a local cruise night Friday night in Bloomfield, Kentucky, and I hope to go to that. And I've put a few upgrades in the car. For example, seat belts, uh, convex mirrors on both sides of the car, a wide-angle rear view mirror. So I have no reason to not spot any vehicles on either side or behind me.